Okay, so the way that I'm going to start this particular landscape, I'm going to change the background colour first of all. Now I've got some pre-selected colours that I've decided would be appropriate for this particular scene. So the first colour that I'm going to choose for the background, if you notice the actual colour that I've chosen on the colour wheel is just pretty much a basic orange, but I've not gone for the strongest version of it. I've kind of wound it back to a slightly more pastel-y, opaque kind of version, so that's going to serve as my background. I've got a whole other range of colours here as well. Now I've also chosen a bit of a greyed out version of that orange. Now I'm going to hopefully create the effect that there's a kind of blue colour coming into the top of the sky of this landscape, but it's surprising that you don't really even need to use blue in order to create that kind of effect. Somehow the kind of cooler colour of the grey next to orange somehow manages to recreate that effect. So sometimes it's a bit of an optical illusion. You put a certain colour next to another and you get the effect of a different colour than it actually is. I'm not going to do too much of this colour anyway, and I'm actually going to use the Gaussian blur just to soften it in somewhat. Next thing I'm going to do is create another layer. I'm going to use a similar to the grey but a slightly darkened version of it. If I change brush this time, I'm using airbrushes for all these different layers and effects, but I'm moving from soft brush to medium brush now. I want to keep the opacity of the brush fairly low, and I just want to create some kind of distance. In fact, I'm going to turn the size of the brush up a bit more. Now if you notice that I held down the brush and it snapped into, I'll do that again. If I do the brush mark and it might have a few wobbles in it, hold it still and it snaps to a straight line. Once I have this in the furthest distance, so anything on the horizon line tends to flatten out the further back it goes. There will be other things that interrupt that line, but initially I just want a bit of a straight line. So I'm going to choose that colour now, but just darken up very slightly. It just wants to be a slight bit darker than the one in front of it. Now what I want to do is go back to my colour ranges. Now I do have a few different kind of colours chosen here in advance. I will go over those background layers at some point. They're probably not going to be dark enough. I want to create some formations. In fact, I'm going to change it slightly, actually lighten up a bit more and put the opacity on full. I want something that really interrupts that kind of line, breaks in front of it. Now if you've watched my more recent landscape picture, you know I did some sort of rocky mountains. This is not really going to be like that. It's going to be a lot plusher. It's going to be a lot more greens coming into the piece on all of the rolling hills really, so there will be more of a rounded effect. There might be some areas where it comes to a bit of an edge, but much less so. So much softened kind of appearance, certainly of the distant forms. Okay, I'm going to create another layer. So you will notice as they get closer to, they will change. They will go from being more oranges and in some ways cooler colours to more kind of greenish colours as they come closer to. I'm going to create another layer. I'm using quite a rich green. It's quite dark this time, but that's certainly what's going to be in the foreground layer. And there may well be a layer that comes in front of that as well, so in fact I'm going to make it just a slight bit darker. Move it ever so slightly into the darker area. Slightest adjustment. In fact, I'm going to turn the opacity of that down so it's not quite so brutal in the shift. So all of those layers are now still adjustable. In fact, I'm going to go back to this layer because I'm not happy with that layer anymore. I feel like I need to create some kind of middle ground between the two, so I'm going to go onto my colours, perhaps darken up slightly, and it's somewhere between those two different colours now. I feel it's a bit closer to what I was aiming at, like so. Now I'm going to create yet another layer. There will be lots of layers to this piece. I'm going to put it on top and I'm going to create a light source. Now it is going to be some kind of sunset, so I'm going to go for something quite yellow, maybe towards the orange initially, but quite a light version. I'm going to perhaps just start with a soft airbrush, turn it quite large, and then just start to place something in this region. Then what I'll do is I'll go to a lighter version, reduce the size of the mark I'm making, like so, and then make it even whiter. Reduce the size of the brush again, maybe turn the opacity up this time, and just create a real bright center point, like so. I will further enhance that brightness effect as well later on, but I just need to put it in there so it explains why I'm doing other things later on. So I feel like I want to go back to the initial layer, the one after that. So you notice I did actually include quite a few different details on that first layer, and that's okay. That's a bit of an oversight. Sometimes you get a bit carried away and you race ahead without remembering to separate the layers, but it's not the end of the world if you do forget it. In fact, the best way around that would be to create another layer, put it under the layer. So I want to affect that layer or just the stuff behind it. So I'm going to go in and around it now, so I can affect everything underneath the layer. In fact, I'm going to go to the medium airbrush again. I want it to be a bit sharper in its effect, and maybe even just a touch on that layer as well. Just in places, I want to just get a slight more darkness into that area. Okay, we'll come back to that anyway, but it also gives me opportunity to take that colour and start to just create a bit of a break in the edge here, where the light is perhaps going to pick up some highlights, some extra bits of texture here as well. So what I'm doing now, I'm going to go to the front two sort of layers, and I've got a pre-selected green here. Now it's quite a vibrant green by contrast to everything else. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to check I'm on the right kind of brush for this. In fact, I might go for the soft airbrush. I'm going to start creating, turn the opacity down as well, creating some kind of texture in here, because I don't want it to be flat. I'm going to have quite a lot of grass texture in here as well. So it's a lot closer to the viewer, a lot closer to what essentially would be the camera if it was a photograph. And so the closer you get to the viewer, the warmer the colours will get, the more vibrant the colours. So if you're looking at a landscape with grass in it, then the greens are going to be richer compared to anything in the distance. So on a daylight landscape, obviously you're going to get more blues in the distance, but on an example like this, where there's not really much blue in the scene because you've got warmth in the background and you've got greens in the foreground, the exaggeration will come more in the form of more vibrant colours like the greens in the foreground, and then it will get sort of blended in, merged in with the warmer colours in the distance. So I'm just going to spend a bit of time adding bits of texture. Okay, so I'm just creating sort of like a broken texture here. So I'm going to leave some areas where it's quite dark because the light source is quite strong from the rear of the scene, from the background, and coming this way. On the top of any mound, you'll get the light hitting, but then on this side of it, you're going to get a shadow. So I'm doing quite a lot of those kind of shapes where the top of a mound is going to hit, but then what would be the back side of it is going to be in shadow. So I'm only getting a sense of placement in for now, and then later on I will concentrate on creating more detail in the grass texture. I'm just getting a sense of the kind of texture initially, just to create the light effect. I think I quite like the idea of it growing up a bit more here. So I'm on the right layer, I'm going to select that colour again. I think I'm going to expand this bit of the hill upwards, like so, and I'm going to also extend it up on this side as well, so you get a bit of a trench, a bit of a valley in this area. Just stops the scene feeling flat. It gives a more of a sense of drawing the eye through the piece then a bit more, rather than just being totally flat as a landscape. Okay, I'll go back to my lighter colours now, turn the opacity down on the sides of the brush down, start building in some of the light that's hitting the edges again. So as it goes off into the distance, you may find that you get less of the broken texture and you just get flatter areas where those bits of texture sort of merge together a bit more and you get a general sense of green. Likewise for this area. So I've got two different colours there. I kind of want to go somewhere between the two for the distance. So I'm going to stick with this one, maybe just make a slightly darker version of it. In fact, I could even push it more towards the greens. Just test that out, it's fine. I'm going to soften or turn the opacity down now. Introduce a bit more here, and if you notice now, I've just turned it back towards the oranges, and although it's definitely not really a green colour anymore, it's more in the yellow or the greyed out yellow, almost towards the orange. When placed here, it tends to appear more green. It's a strange effect, but you just want to be careful that you're not using the same strength of green across the piece, because it will have a different impact in the distance than it does in the foreground. So you just got to be careful of that. Okay, so all that green so far is on that one layer. I'm going to continue adding a bit more of the bright green into the scene as well. So I'm going to take some of the background colour. I'm going to go for somewhere between the two. So obviously any colours that reflect into the general landscape is going to be a mixture of everything. So I've already got the green. I want some of the orange kind of colour, but I want some of the yellow as well. So I'm just going to select from the centre area there. I'm going to start bringing in a sense that it's hitting the top of things. In fact, I'm going to move slightly further away, just a bit. I don't want it to be as dark as that, but I want it not to be as light as that either. So anywhere that's particularly in this kind of region, I'm going to do the highlights a bit stronger. So I'm just introducing it to this general region as well, just softly. I also want to add it to the mix of the green. Okay, I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to use this layer to begin to add more texture into the grass. Now, I'm not going to use a specific brush for this. I'm going to do most of this by hand. I'm going to create a bit more of a warmth, so it still, in effect, is going to appear quite green. I'll just show you the impact of that colour. But if you look on here, it's much more towards the yellow and orange than it is anywhere near the green. But the impact on it is still going to be quite green, but I'm going to have quite a light version of it this time. And this is going to be what I use for picking out maybe blades of grass that stick up a little bit more. In fact, I'm going to take it even warmer than that, like so. Turn the opacity down still a little bit and start to just build in some more texture. So anyway, on top of the mounds now, I can start really allowing some of the grass to catch the light a bit more, especially in the foreground ones more. So I'm just choosing just to suggest along the top edge, that's all. Don't need to do too much more than that to create the effect. For anyone that's been watching my YouTube channel for a while, been following what I've been doing, you'll know that I've been creating some videos that were based around an interactive element, and I decided a few weeks ago that that was the way that I was going to move forward with it. And the proposal was that I was going to release a drawing every Sunday, and then through the week I would take suggestions, and then by the Saturday I would sort of present where I'd managed to get to with it. The idea being that it would allow me a bit more creativity and presenting the kind of things from my imagination, the kind of content that I like to produce myself personally. And I've fairly quickly come to the realization that perhaps there isn't the same appetite for that kind of content as there is traditional kind of content like this for landscapes. And my ego has to just swallow that up really and accept that that is the case for now. But I'm not going to give up. For those people that really enjoyed the interactive paintings, I'm not giving up on them. I will be producing them, but the schedule of release is going to be somewhat amended so that these types of tutorials are going to be my main content every weekend, occasionally Sunday, but I think Saturday is more likely to be the day that they will be released. And then I'm going to try and keep up with the interactive paintings as and when I can, perhaps release them in addition to this, so maybe release those midweek as well. I've been trying out different things, and by the time this video is released I should have passed the 40,000 subscriber mark, and really it's just given me a moment of reflection of what people have subscribed for really. And I think in the main the majority of people are subscribed to see this type of content, and I accept that, and therefore I'm going to doubly commit to producing more of this type of video. But I would like to continue presenting my own thoughts, my own imagination and my own work as well, but I think maybe it needs to run alongside this type of content. I think with a lot of artists, ego can take over sometimes, and you just got to keep it in check and realise that the world doesn't necessarily want to see what you want to present, and sometimes your strengths lie in different areas. And I have to really be grateful that people that are supporting me, especially my patrons over at Patreon, really been giving me feedback and helping me come to this sort of realisation, and it's really been valuable. So I'd really like to massively thank the people that have given me that type of input really. I do want to create a channel that is helpful for my subscribers and actually serve the people that have committed to going back on a weekly basis or intermittently. I do want to create things that are beneficial to those people that do make the effort to come back and watch my videos. So hopefully I'll find the right balance and keep everyone happy and keep creative, as well as presenting this type of content where it helps people get to grips with some of the more basic challenges of producing sort of simpler landscapes, and then they can hopefully, or you can, develop your own work at the same time. Okay, so most of that grass is on a different layer. I feel like it's a bit strong, so I'm going to turn the opacity down on that layer just a little bit. So I'm happy with the effects, but I'm just going to soften it slightly. I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to continue working now. So the light, I want to definitely be having a strong impact on these edges. If it was water, you'd definitely get more of a kind of central column where wherever the light source is, it would impact very, very significantly in this area. And it's not going to be quite as exaggerated as that, because it's not as reflective a substance as water, but it is going to get some of that effect going on as well. So I'm just further generating a bit more texture here and there. I want to exaggerate the sense that these kind of shapes, the dark patches of shadow, maybe those forms get smaller as they go off into the distance. So obviously they're going to appear bigger here because they're much closer. Okay, I'm going to move on to the sky, so I'm going to create another layer. And this time I'm going to work some sort of darker clouds into a particular region. So I'm going to go to the orange, but I'm going to go towards a much darker and greyed out. I remember before when I was showing you the impact of that on the sky, and it almost appears blue, even though there's not really any blue in there really. It's still very much in the orange region, but I want to create some kind of sense that there's maybe a band of cloud coming across the sky. Okay, I'm going to go to this area of the sky. I'm going to create some similar kind of effect, but I want to show some sort of light areas of cloud that are maybe just picking up the light from the sun and extending some texture into this sort of region. So I'm just going to choose a kind of richer green, and I'm just going to, maybe a darker version, just going to begin enriching this area a little bit more. I want that green to just really get a bit more lush as it gets closer to. Okay, I'm going to go back to the sky layer, and I'm just going to select some of the lighter colour here, and I'm going to start just exaggerating some of the edges here, so especially when it goes sort of above and below the sun. I think I might also introduce some slightly darker bands of colour as well that go perhaps in front of the sunset as well. So just creating some texture in here, breaking it up a little bit so it's not too flat. I think I need to add some sort of warmer colours as well. Perhaps just a warmer colour that goes in front of the sun, obscures it slightly. Some broken texture. I think what I'm going to do is just take the sky and put it behind some of the layers of landscape, so that if I do choose to darken up some of the edges here, it's not going to go over the top of the mountains. Perhaps though I will move the sun also behind. Still want there to be clouds in front of the sun, so I've just changed the order of the layers a little bit. It's fine if the sky is further behind, not a problem at all. I think what I'm going to do also, I'm going to just find the correct layer, is I'm going to darken up the horizon a little bit, so it's on that layer. I think I want to make it a little bit closer to the sort of hill range that's in the foreground of the distance. So I'm going to change the brush. I'm going to change it to a medium brush. I'm just going to go over this like so. So I'm going to go back to a darker red colour this time, and although it is generally darker orange here, I do need to just exaggerate this area, so as it gets further over here it's going to get even darker as it gets further away from the sun. And also I want more of its impact over here too. I think I'm going to take just a hint of this colour here and have that in the sky too. So there's some colours that perhaps come less of a distinction between what's going off in the actual sky and what's going off in the landscape, so there's a kind of blurring of the lines. There's colours here that appear in the sky, and there's colours in the sky that appear in the landscape, and the two become less distinct from each other sort of further into the distance they go. I think what I'm also going to do is just knock this over to the blue side. I know that I'm not introducing very much in the terms of the blue colour here, but I feel perhaps just a slight push in the direction of blue, but not too much. Now it is really quite enough just to show a kind of grey. I mean, it is a very greyed out version of the blue anyway. You almost get the right kind of colours even without using blue. So I'm not going OTT with it. If I was to go strong in with it, you'd see that it's a very, very strong colour there. So I'm using it extremely subtly, but I just want to push it slightly more towards the blue than the grey was actually delivering. So I'm going against what I said earlier a little bit, but I just want to slightly intensify the impact of that blue. I'm going to go back to my red colours, and I want something quite a bit deeper coming into this area, I think. Just a hint of it. Perhaps that's too much. I feel also what I'm going to do with the landscape layer, if I go onto the correct layer, I feel like I want to darken this whole layer up just a little bit more. Sometimes you can't see how things are working until you start to place things in position. So if I show you where it was, where I'm moving it to, perhaps that's a little bit far, but I certainly feel that by darkening it up slightly, it fits better compared to the background. I definitely want the mountains here to appear a lot darker than the sky in the background there, whereas previously there's a bit more of a similarity in strength of tone. So by darkening it up a little bit more, it seems to fit more naturally into that space, which is more like what I want. I'm going to go to the sun layer this time. I'm flitting about a bit between the different areas. I'm just trying to find things that look right. Sometimes you just have to do different areas, see how it impacts the surrounding area, then go back to it, and it is a very organic process for me personally. So I'm just adding quite a lot more white into that sun area, and then I'm going to move towards the yellow. I'm just going to just change to the soft airbrush for this part. In fact, I'm going to create a new layer and put it underneath the white immediately, and then just introduce more of that yellow around the white, like so. Perhaps go back to the white, create another slightly softened version of that too, blend it in slightly more. I feel like that's working a bit more, it's a bit more intense. I'm going to go back to the sky layer, if I can find it again. I remember I put it down here. It's anything with lots of layers that you can get a little bit confused at times, but I'm going to go back to the sky layer. I'm going to start introducing just a little bit more of the yellow in the sky as well. I was doing it before, but I feel like I need a slightly more intense version. Again, I'm just going to work in some darker tones for these clouds. I also feel, because I've darkened this layer up, I want to jump onto the kind of foreground layers, and I feel like I want to just darken them up slightly as well. So one thing has an impact on the next. There, I'm just a little bit happy with that, so I can show you. Hopefully you can see the difference. It just intensifies it up a little bit. I'm going to perhaps just give a hint more of the greenery coming in areas. Kind of fine tuning at this point. I'm going to start just playing around a little bit with these sort of shapes. It feels a little bit flat, a little bit dull, so I'm just sort of breaking up with a bit of texture. It's very subtle detail, but it just stops it looking quite so dead and flat, just to add a bit more of a break. And again, it's something that may not be very visible on camera, but if you come to do this yourself, you will see the difference. So I've just taken a little bit of the green. It's on a very low opacity, but I'm just breaking up the texture here, so you can see sort of a slight sort of rippling in areas, break of texture. Just makes it look generally a bit more alive. I think what I'll do is, I think I want to intensify this area as well. It's a bit more perhaps of a silhouette because it's directly in front of the sun, so as well as having the strongest highlights, perhaps it needs the strongest shadows too. Just going to go to my sky layer again, and I'm going to use the smudge tool. Feel that that's too strong. Feel that perhaps I need a softer version of that. Just blur that in slightly. Maybe just use this to help create a sense of movement. These are clouds very much in the distance, so it would have a general sense of being stretched across the sky sometimes, sometimes not, sometimes you definitely get that kind of appearance. But actually a combination of the different kind of textures works quite well, so I'm going to work back into some of that now and just add a bit more kind of texture that isn't moving as much. going to go underneath that layer. Just add a slight sense that there's maybe some paler colours going off underneath all of this. Like so. Go back to my proper sky layer. Add a bit more sense. Okay, things going off there too. Go back to the landscape layer. Just going to maybe soften some of the impacts around this region. Just a bit. Feels like it works better now. I'm going to take the sky, merge it off around this area. Extend it across here, so stretch the light across here a little bit. I'm going to take the darkest tone, which I've just grabbed from here. That's going to make it a little bit darker and more towards the grey. I just want to do an area perhaps where you've got the most closest to kind of texture coming in as well. Just adding a little bit more texture into the sun region. Maybe a slight yellowing is necessary for this part of the sun too, where it's got cloud going over the top of it. Okay, I'm going to leave the sky as it is for now. I'm just going to do a little bit more refining in the foreground. So if I can find the top layer where the grass is, so take some of this brightest colour, just suggest a little bit more in terms of the highlights in these sort of areas. Okay, I'm going to leave this particular landscape here for this time. I could fiddle, I could refine, I could really get extra, really refined details into certain areas, but in terms of generating or creating the general atmosphere, the lighting effects and the sense of distance, I'm quite happy with that. So like I said earlier, please tune in every Saturday. There will be another kind of tutorial. It could be a landscape, it could be another element of nature or the human body, something along those lines anyway. And then I'm going to be releasing my interactive videos intermittently during the month as well. Thanks again to everyone who's supported me over at my Patreon page. If you want to find more information about that, there is a link down in the description. Otherwise, please subscribe and I'll catch you back here again. See you later.